Welcome back to The Deep Dive. I'm your host, ready to break down the noise, and it is Sunday, February 22nd, 2026.
And I'm your resident analyst, here to help unpack what's actually going on under the hood.
Yeah, and I have to say, if you've glanced at your phone this morning, you probably have a headache. I know I do.
Oh, a massive headache. It is loud out there today.
Right. The notifications are just relentless right now. You've got the Supreme Court ruling, the global protests, just the sheer volume of noise. It feels like the whole world is shouting at once.
It really does. But, that's exactly why we're here. Our job isn't to shout back at the news. It's to put on the noise-canceling headphones, unroll the blueprints, and look at the actual structure underneath all that panic.
Exactly. And today we are doing that with a very specific, very revealing document. We are unpacking a daily strategic brief that landed on our desk early this morning.
And honestly, it's a fascinating read.
It is cold. I mean, it is clinical. It doesn't look at the world as a series of moral victories or defeats. It looks at the world as a plumbing diagram of money and power.
That's the perfect way to describe it. This brief is obsessed with what it calls institutional order flow.
Institutional order flow.
Yeah, it's basically saying, ignore what the politicians are saying on the podium. Ignore the outrage. Watch where the wires are actually being cut and where the new pipes are being laid.
And according to this source, the pipes are being laid in some very unexpected places. So our mission today is to look past what the brief calls the MSM smokescreen.
Right, the mainstream media smokescreen.
We're going to talk about a massive structural purge inside the U.S. government that makes those headlines look like a total distraction. We're going to look at the militarization of the Arctic Circle, which is apparently way further along than anyone realizes.
Much further.
And crucially for everyone listening, we're going to talk about what this means for your money, from Bitcoin to your retirement account.
It's essentially a roadmap for sovereign deep plays. It shows a world moving away from the post-war global architecture to something the brief calls Fortress America.
Okay, so let's start with the elephant in the room. The headline that is absolutely dominating the news cycle today. The Supreme Court.
Right. The ruling on executive tariff powers.
It is everywhere. You see, court limits president's tariff authority, or global markets cheer return to rule of law. There are even stories about humanitarian aid packages to Pakistan being stalled. The narrative is pretty clear. The administration just took a massive loss.
That is the narrative, yeah.
They supposedly overreached on trade wars, the court slapped them down, and now we're returning to normal cooperative diplomacy.
But that is the smokescreen, according to the brief. It argues that if you think this ruling really matters, if you think this is a win for the old system, you've fallen for the magic trick.
The sleight of hand.
Exactly. You're watching the flourish with the left hand while the right hand is doing something completely different.
Okay, so let's look at the right hand. Are you saying the administration wanted this ruling? Or do they just not care?
They don't care. The argument here is that tariffs are a tool from, 2018. They're obsolete. The brief argues the administration has already shifted to a new operating system called bilateral transactionalism.
Let's pause on that term, bilateral transactionalism.
Yeah.
It sounds like corporate speak, but the brief treats it like a weapon. Break that down for us.
Okay, think of the old global system like a grocery store. Everyone walks in, there are set prices on the shelf, and you pay cash.
Makes sense.
Tariffs are just the store manager raising the prices at the door. Bilateral transactionalism is, it's closing the store, it's locking the doors.
Wow, that sounds intense.
It is. It's saying, I have the energy, I have the food, I have the security. You want some? Okay, I don't want your currency. I want this specific resource from you or this specific political concession.
So it's direct barter.
Direct, aggressive barter.
So it's coercion using infrastructure rather than taxes.
Exactly. You don't need a tariff to punish a country if you can just turn off their access to the SWIFT banking layer or deny them LNG shipments. The brief says the tariff power the Supreme Court just took away is like taking a steering wheel away from a driver who is already flying a plane. It's irrelevant to the actual vehicle of power.
Which brings us to the blind spot. Because while the media is high-fiving over this legal victory, the brief points to data coming out of the Office of Personnel Management that is, frankly, shocking.
The DOGE data.
Yeah, I had to reread this section 3 times because the number just didn't seem real.
You're talking about the DOGE-led purge.
We've all heard the jokes about the Department of Government Efficiency. We've seen the memes for years now. But the numbers in this brief aren't memes. It states that as of this month, early 2026, the federal civilian workforce has been reduced by 9%.
9%. Let that sink in.
Just to put that in perspective for you listening, that is 212,000 human beings removed from the payroll, gone.
And we need to be clear about who these people are. This isn't just natural attrition. This isn't just people retiring and not being replaced.
Right.
This is the active deletion of entire layers of the administrative state. The brief calls it a shift in the center of gravity.
Explain that shift. Because if you fire over 200,000 people, the work doesn't just stop, right? Does it go somewhere else?
The work moves, and this is the critical insight that ties back to the Supreme Court ruling. The center of gravity is moving away from Washington, D.C.
Okay, where to?
It's moving from the career bureaucrats to private defense and tech hubs. It's moving to private contractors.
So we are privatizing the machinery of the government itself.
We are operationalizing it. The brief argues that the administration views the traditional civil service as a friction point, a slow layer. By cutting the workforce and rerouting that funding to private contractors, they are building a machine that is faster, leaner, and crucially...
less accountable.
Exactly. Less accountable to things like Supreme Court rulings on bureaucratic procedure.
That connects back to the start perfectly. If you dismantle the agencies that actually enforce the regulation is just a piece of paper.
Precisely. You can't sue a ghost. And if the regulatory body is now just a series of automated contracts with private firms, the old checks and balances don't really have a place to plug in anymore.
It's almost a hostile takeover of the state from the inside.
Or a necessary restructuring, depending on your stock portfolio. But yes, it's a fundamental structural change in how the U.S. operates. And this internal dismantling is happening so it can support an external expansion. To see that, we need to look north.
The Arctic.
The high north.
Now, I track geopolitical news pretty closely, and I've seen the headlines about Greenland recently. You know, diplomatic friction, environmental concerns, standard stuff. But this brief uses the term I haven't seen before, infrastructure reclamation.
Yeah, that's a heavy euphemism if I've ever heard one. They are really talking about the Boreal security zone.
Boreal security zone. It sounds like a level on a video game. What is it actually?
It isn't just a military exercise. It's a standing mission architecture. It's the full-scale militarization of the Arctic Circle. The brief details two specific developments that you're definitely not seeing on the nightly news. First, Norway.
Okay, what's happening in Norway?
We are seeing the permanent basing of new missile battalions 300 kilometers inside the Arctic Circle.
Wait, 300 kilometers inside? That's not a defensive line. That's a massive projection of power.
It's a serious kinetic footprint. It's there to lock down the Barents Sea. And the second data point is closer to home, Canada.
Right.
The U.S. and Canada have opened a new joint facility in Greenland. The public press release calls it a consulate.
A consulate is usually where you go if you lose your passport, right?
Yeah.
Or get a visa.
Usually.
Yeah.
But this specific consulate has a remit for security coordination. The brief argues this has nothing to do with diplomacy. It's about locking down the Northwest Passage.
So what's the ultimate goal here? Why this sudden obsession with the ice?
Because the world is fragmenting. That bilateral transactionalism we talked about earlier, it breaks traditional global trade routes.
Like the old NATO bottlenecks.
Exactly. If the Suez Canal or the Straits of Malacca become hostile choke points, or if the Panama Canal gets jammed up by politics, the U.S. needs a route that nobody else can touch. A sovereign trade highway.
So if the Atlantic gets messy and the Pacific gets hot, we just go over the top.
Exactly. It's the roof of the fortress. By controlling the Arctic, Fortress America can move energy and resources between Europe and North America without ever entering contested waters.
It's about creating a gated community, but on a continental scale.
It really is.
It changes how you look at a map. We're so used to looking at the world east to west. This forces you to look top-down.
And that top-down view is expensive. Building missile silos in the permafrost isn't cheap. Firing 200,000 bureaucrats saves money, sure, but where is that capital actually going? And more importantly, how does this impact the listener's bank account?
That is the perfect pivot. Because I know you're listening to this thinking, okay, the government is shrinking and the Arctic is weaponized. Great. How do I not go broke?
Exactly.
The brief calls these actionable signals. And I want to challenge some of these because a few of them seem pretty contrary to the panic I'm seeing on social media today.
Let's get into it. The signals in this document are bold.
Start with the big one, crypto, Bitcoin.
The orange coin.
We are looking at a current price of $68,029 this morning. Now, context matters here. We hit a peak of $126K not that long ago.
Yeah.
That is a 50% haircut.
Yeah.
If you bought the COP, you are feeling physically ill right now. People are calling it the popping of the bubble.
They are. But the brief takes a very hard contrarian stance here. It advises to accumulate. It calls this drop an orderly deleveraging.
Orderly. I mean, losing half your value is orderly.
In the context of this massive geopolitical shift, yes. The brief argues that the 126K peak was retail hype. It was paper hands and leverage. What's happening now is just a flush.
Flushing out the weak hands.
Right. They believe the underlying trend is sovereign accumulation.
So the signal is definitely don't panic, sell.
The signal is accumulate. As the US dollar becomes more weaponized, going back to bilateral transactionalism, neutral assets like Bitcoin become essential for nation states, not just day traders. They're betting the floor is in because the buyers aren't speculators anymore. The buyers are governments.
Okay, so if Bitcoin is the digital neutral asset, let's talk about the analog one, precious metals, specifically gold.
Gold is telling a fascinating story right now. It's currently trading at $5,088 per ounce.
Over $5,000. I remember when 2000 seemed insane. It really feels like we live in a completely different era now.
We do, and the brief says the 5K mark is established as a floor, but the advice here isn't buy. The advice is hold.
Why the distinction? Why hold and not buy?
Because they don't see this as a cycle. It's a structural rotation. The repricing is already done. The brief argues that institutions have already rotated out of the US dollar since it's now a weapon and into bullion.
So gold is your shield. You don't buy a shield in the middle of the battle, but you definitely don't throw it away.
Exactly. It's your store of value in a fragmented world. But if you want growth, if you want to actually play the Fortress America build-out, you need to look at silver.
This was the surprise for me. Silver is trading at $82.40 an ounce. That is historically very high, but the brief says strong buy. Why is silver the play over gold?
Because gold is money, but silver is tech. And this connects directly back to the DOGE Purge and those Arctic missiles.
Connect those dots for me.
You simply cannot build a modern defense industrial base without silver. It is the most conductive metal on Earth.
Right.
If you are replacing human bureaucrats with autonomous systems, drone swarms, satellite constellations, and advanced guidance systems, you need mountains of silver.
So there's a physical shortage looming.
A defense tech industrial deficit. That's the exact phrase they use. We are reshoring all this defense manufacturing back to the U.S., but we haven't secured the raw materials yet. The brief argues silver is massively undervalued relative to its strategic necessity. It's not a monetary play at all. It's a manufacturing bottleneck play.
That makes total sense. It's the pick and shovel play for the new sovereign architecture.
Precisely.
Let's touch on energy really quick. Brent crude is sitting at $71.76. Now, the Middle East is chaotic right now. Usually that sends oil shooting straight to $100. Why are we sitting at 71?
The signal here is wait. And the reason is U.S. shale production.
Because we have too much of it.
Because U.S. production is acting as a massive global ceiling on price. Even with a crisis in Pakistan or tensions in the Middle East, U.S. supply offsets it instantly. The brief suggests waiting. Look for a tactical floor at around $65.
That's almost ironic. The world is tense. The gas prices are somewhat stable because the U.S. has turned inward and is pumping its own supply.
It's the direct benefit of the fortress model.
Okay, I want to pivot to a section that I know affects a lot of our listeners directly. We have a lot of people tracking institutional money or government employees listening. The brief breaks down the TSP, the Thrift Savings Plan, and the advice here is aggressive.
It's a complete inversion of the traditional safe portfolio strategy.
Let's start with the S Fund, small cap stocks. The brief lists this as a buy. Why small caps? Usually in a crisis, you fly to the big giants, right?
Just remember the DOGE purge we talked about? Those 212,000 jobs?
Yeah.
When those government roles vanish, the actual need for the work doesn't vanish. The government still needs data processed. They need bases built, logistics managed. Who do you think picks up those contracts?
Small, agile, private companies.
Exactly. The companies in the S Fund are the primary beneficiaries of the DOGE Chainsaw. They are absorbing the contracts and the talent.
That's a fascinating rotation.
Right.
You're betting on the private firms picking up the slack.
Right.
And what about the I Fund? International stocks?
Rotate out, hard sell.
Because of the fragmentation of the world order.
Specifically because of what they call European energy cost insolvency. The brief argues that without cheap energy, Europe is struggling. Betting on the I Fund is betting on a fragmented system.
Brutal. And then there's the G Fund. Government securities. This is usually the safe haven. It's cash. It never loses money.
The brief says avoid.
Avoid the safe haven.
Because in a world where real wages are outpacing inflation by 1.3%, but gold is at $5,000, holding cash is a guaranteed loss of strategic agency. You are slowly bleeding out your purchasing power.
So get out of cash, get out of international, and get into the small American companies building the machine.
That's the structural play.
This actually leads perfectly into a demographic shift the brief mentions. We talked about where the money is going, but where are the people going? If D.C. is emptying out, where is the migration headed?
The brief identifies new Tier 1 zones, specifically the Space Coast in Florida and Alabama, and surprisingly, Arctic hubs.
People are actually moving to the Arctic hubs.
If that's where the security architecture is being built, that's where the institutional money flows. But the Space Coast is the really big one. We're seeing a total decoupling. These defense-centric hubs are completely ignoring national affordability issues.
Why are prices there rising so fast?
Because that's where the sovereign engineering class is moving.
Sovereign engineering class. I circled that term in red ink when I read it. Who exactly are these people?
This is the human element of the analysis. It contrasts the legacy GS-15 policy administrator with this new sovereign engineering class. They call the GS-15 an endangered species.
Paint a picture of these two for us. Who is the endangered species?
The GS-15 is your traditional career bureaucrat in D.C. They write white papers. They manage policy compliance. Their power comes from their position in the old administrative state. The brief says that role is vanishing.
And the sovereign engineer?
They work for a high-output defense contractor or one of these new DOGE teams. They don't write policy. They build autonomous systems. They are defined by pure output. The brief claims these private teams operate with 20% of the headcount, but 5x the lethality of legacy agencies.
5x the lethality. That is a heavy metric to use for a workforce.
In this new paradigm, efficiency is lethality. If you can code the drone swarm, you are the new player. If you can only write the regulation about the drone swarm, you are obsolete.
It forces a complete rethink of what job security means. Job security used to mean a government pension. Now it means your direct utility to Fortress America.
Exactly. Are you building the fortress or are you just managing the paperwork?
This is a lot to process for a Sunday. It feels like the ground is fundamentally shifting under our feet.
It is, but that's why we read the brief, to see the shift before we lose our footing.
We can't wrap this up without the firebrand question. The brief always ends with one provocation designed to keep you up at night. And this one ties the Supreme Court story and the workforce purged together in a way that gave me chills.
It's the ultimate culmination of everything we've discussed today.
Go ahead, lay it on us.
The question is this. If the Supreme Court has successfully limited executive tariff powers, but the executive has already replaced 9% of the federal workforce with private contractors, has the administrative state already been neutralized beyond judicial repair?
Just let that sink in for a second.
We assume the courts can stop the administration. We assume the laws apply to the agencies. But if the agency is now just a network of private companies operating under commercial contracts?
Who do you sue?
Exactly. You don't. The structure has mutated.
So the real question for you listening is, are you positioned for that world? Is your portfolio, your career, your mindset stuck in the GS-15 era? Or are you ready for the sovereign engineering era?
It's definitely time to check your coordinates. The map has absolutely changed.
On that note, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back with the next brief when it drops. Until then, keep your eyes on the signal, not the noise.
Stay sharp out there.